Hey guys, what's up? My name's Andy and you're watching Andy's Book Club. So I hope you guys have all enjoyed all the books that we covered so far. We're starting a new book this week and it's going to be The Tipping Point by Malcolm Gladwell. Now, the reason why I picked this book is because I think it's very intriguing to me, all the ideas that are in this book. It's all about how little things can make a big difference. So what he means by the tipping point is a particular point in, let's say, a product's lifetime or an epidemic or something that causes one thing to spread, like an epidemic, like a disease. So we're going to go through examples of what exactly kind of things can tip. So for example, let's say this YouTube channel. So right now there might be not a lot of people watching this YouTube channel, but at some point a YouTube channel might tip, right? So once, let's say I get a certain number of subscribers, a lot of people will suddenly hear about this channel and people will start subscribing like crazy, right? Or at least in theory, that's how it works. I don't know, I haven't gone to the tipping point yet, but you would notice that in life, nothing grows linearly. So if you're building a business, or if you're trying to sell a product, or if you're even conducting a chemistry experiment sometimes, you would encounter something called a tipping point or a critical mass, sometimes it's known as. So once you hit that point, then the popularity or the chemical reaction or whatever it is, it makes a big difference what happens after the tipping point compared to everything that has occurred to it before. So I'll elaborate on what all that means. But before I do that, let's go through the introduction and maybe you guys will have a clearer idea of what this book is about and why I think it's a good book for us to cover for the next, I don't know, few weeks or so. So the tipping point begins with the story of Hush Puppies. Now, Hush Puppies were a particular brand of shoes made by this company called Wolverine. And it was in the 90s. So in the 90s, they started selling these shoes. And at first, they weren't that popular. And in the beginning of 1995, the company was actually considering canceling this line of product altogether because they're just not selling too many of them. But then something happened. They noticed that they got all these calls from these stylists and all these fashionistas and all these people that are involved in the fashion industry. And the people kept on calling them and asking if they had any Hush Puppies in store. So they started realizing that for some reason, they weren't doing a lot of marketing for it because they thought that it was a dying brand. But all of a sudden, all these stylists were asking for them and then they exploded in popularity all of a sudden. So by the fall of 1995, Hush Puppies were selling hundreds of thousands of pairs. And in 1996, they would actually go on to sell 4 times more than what they sold in 95. So it was really crazy how all of that happened at once, seemingly just kind of randomly without them doing too much. So a lot of people are wondering what exactly happened, what caused the popularity of Hush Puppies to so-called tip. So if we look for tipping points in real life scenarios in history, we see that tipping points pop up again and again, not just with Hush Puppies, but with other things. Crime in East New York, for example. So crime in East New York was really high for the longest time, and then suddenly within a span of like less than 5 years, it encountered a sudden drop of over 60%. And nobody really knew why. There were theories as to what exactly happened. Maybe they increased the police force. Politicians would certainly like to convince you that they were the ones that were responsible for reducing this crime rate drastically. But how much of that credit really goes to the politicians and how much of that credit goes to other factors that weren't under the control or had nothing to do with the politicians who are running the country or the city. So all these examples pop up again and again, and we'll mention them as we read through the book, and you'll see where these examples pop up. And the author also tries to explain what his perspective is on what caused these things to tip and what exactly can we learn from all these tipping points. But for now, the author defines some definitions of what an epidemic is. So I'm sure you've heard in the news recently, we have an actual epidemic of the COVID-19 coronavirus that's spreading in China right now. Really scary stuff, by the way. And that's an actual epidemic. But when the author Malcolm Gladwell talks about epidemics, he's not just talking about real epidemics with viruses or bacteria. So he says that things can be epidemics as well. So an idea could be epidemics. So for example, as we mentioned earlier about the Hush Puppies, the idea of Hush Puppies being cool is an idea that just spread all of a sudden, and it spread like a virus basically. So one person thought that they were cool, and then maybe they told 10 of their friends, and then 10 of their friends told their other 10 of their friends. So it just spread like crazy. And we're trying to explore the reasons of why that happens. And so one signature of an epidemic is that it has to be contagious. So whether it be an idea or an actual disease or just some sort of product or scenario, then it has to be contagious. It has to spread like a virus. And the next point is that little things make a big difference. What causes one thing to tip could be the smallest thing that seems insignificant, but that thing can make the difference between that thing tipping and becoming viral or becoming contagious, that idea or that product, or that little thing could actually do nothing. But the thing is that what you think would cause a thing to tip is not necessarily consistent with what actually happens. So a thing that might be insignificant could cause a thing to tip. So the author tries to illustrate what does he mean by little things can make a big difference. So imagine if you had a piece of paper and you folded it, it becomes twice as thick, right? So if you fold it again, it becomes twice as thick again. So if you manage to actually fold a piece of paper 50 times, which is physically impossible, by the way, but if you could, that distance would be from here to the sun. That's how little things can build up really quickly. So you think how thin a piece of paper is. If you just folded it 50 times, that would be a huge distance. So as we talked about, tipping point is also sometimes called the critical mass. So how does a product or an idea or anything reach a critical mass? And another example of things spreading like a virus would be the use of cell phones and fax machines. So there's actually a pretty simple explanation as to why those things kind of increase exponentially as opposed to linearly in terms of popularity. So if you're the only one of your friends who has a cell phone, that would be pretty useless, right? Because you wouldn't be able to call anyone, you wouldn't be able to text anyone because none of your friends have cell phones. You're not able to talk to anyone with your cell phone if you're the only one with a cell phone. Same thing with a fax machine. Let's say you wanted to send somebody a fax. Well, they don't have a fax machine at their end, let's say, then you wouldn't be able to send that fax. So by you having a fax machine, that's absolutely useless to you. You only want a fax machine if other people have fax machines so that you can send them faxes. I don't know if people really send faxes anymore. That's just, you can tell that the author has probably written this a long time ago where people actually use fax machines. I don't know, maybe people still use fax machines. And lastly, we're gonna talk about what is a common thing between syphilis in Baltimore, Sesame Street, and Blue's Clues, which are two very popular children's shows. Now, I watched a lot of Blue's Clues back then when I was young, and it gives away my age, but whatever. I really loved that show, and I wasn't the only one. It exploded in popularity, so it kind of tipped at one point, and then it just became super popular for whatever reason. So we'll explore what exactly that reason is and what caused it to tip and things like that. And number 3 is a startup in Delaware. So we'll see what all of these things have in common and how they relate to the idea of the tipping point. So I'm super excited for this book. I hope you guys enjoy it. That was just an introduction, and I'll see you next week. As always, be sure to subscribe and hit the like button. It really helps out with the YouTube algorithm. And be sure to follow me on Twitter and Instagram. I'll leave the links down below in the description. And don't forget to put in the comments book suggestions on what you want to see covered in this book club next. I love to hear what you want to say. And with that being said, thanks for watching. So for example,